The sound of the gavel striking wood echoed through the dusty auction hall in Fargo, North Dakota Territory, 1876, silencing the murmurs that had been rippling through the crowd. Pearlie Vance stood on the auction block, her 16 years of life having brought her nothing but misery, and now the ultimate humiliation. Tears streamed down her dirt-smudged face, her once vibrant green eyes now dull with despair. Her parents' debt had led to this moment her freedom being sold to the highest bidder. $50 for this fine young woman, called out Augustus Merriweather, the auctioneer, his voice booming across the crowded room. Strong back, good health. Ideal for housework, cooking, and whatever else you might require. His suggestive tone made several men in the audience chuckle darkly. Pearlie shuddered. At 18, she understood all too well whatever else entailed. Her parents had died in a fire 3 months prior, leaving behind a mountain of debt that creditors had been quick to collect. With no family and no means to pay, she had been seized as an asset. Though slavery had been abolished years ago, indentured servitude remained a harsh reality for many, especially in territories where law enforcement was sparse and justice often overlooked. "Do I hear 60?" Merriweather's voice cut through Pearlie's thoughts. A man in the front row, red-faced and swaying slightly from whiskey, raised his hand. 60 from Mr. Holloway, the auctioneer acknowledged with a nod. "This girl can cook a meal that'll make you forget your own name, gentlemen. Do I hear 70? Another hand went up. Then 80. Then 90. Pearlie's stomach churned as she watched her future being bartered away. She had known most of these men her whole life, had served them at her parents' small restaurant, had greeted them on the street. Now they assessed her value with cold, calculating eyes. At the back of the room, partially obscured by the crowd, stood Yancy Young. He hadn't planned to attend the auction today. He'd ridden into Fargo just that morning, intent on selling a small herd of cattle before heading back to his modest ranch 30 miles south. But the commotion from the town hall had drawn him in, curiosity getting the better of him. What he found turned his stomach. The sight of the young woman trembling on the auction block, tears falling unchecked down her face, stirred something deep within him. At 25, Yancy had seen his share of injustice. Orphaned at 12 and raised by an old rancher who'd found him wandering after an Indian raid, he'd built his life from nothing but hard work and determination. $100, called Holloway, the drunken man from the front row. His eyes gleamed with something that made Pearlie shrink back. $100, repeated Merriweather, raising his hammer. Going once, Pearlie's soft sobbing was now the only sound in the room, going twice. Yancy felt his hand move before his mind had fully decided. $500, he called out, his deep voice cutting through the tense silence. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as heads turned to identify the speaker. Even Pearlie looked up, her tear-filled eyes searching for the source of the bid. Merriweather, momentarily stunned, recovered quickly. $500 from the gentleman in the back. Do I hear 550? Holloway turned, scowling at Yancy. Who the hell are you to interfere? This ain't your town, cowboy. $500, Yancy repeated firmly, ignoring the man. He stepped forward, allowing the crowd to part for him. The silver spurs on his boots jangled with each deliberate step. Cash, right now, $500 going once. Merriweather began, his eyes darting between Holloway and the newcomer. $550, Holloway spat, his face contorted with anger. Yancy reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. Everything I have, he said, his voice steady as he met the auctioneer's gaze. $1,000. The room fell into shocked silence. Even Pearlie had stopped crying, her wide eyes fixed on the tall cowboy now standing at the front of the crowd. Merriweather swallowed hard. $1,000, going once, going twice. He paused, looking at Holloway, who had shrunk back, defeated. Sold to the gentleman with the $1,000. The gavel came down with finality, and Pearlie felt her knees weaken with relief and confusion. Who was this stranger, and why had he paid such an exorbitant sum for her? Yancy approached the auctioneer's table, counting out the bills from his pouch. It was indeed everything he had the profit from 3 years of cattle sales that he'd intended to use to expand his ranch. But as he glanced at the young woman on the platform, still trembling but with a spark of hope now visible in her eyes, he knew he'd made the right decision. "The paperwork," Merriweather said, pushing a document toward Yancy. "Sign here to confirm transfer of the indenture." Yancy took the pen, his hand hovering over the paper for a moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, he tore the document in half. "There will be no indenture," he said firmly. "I'm not buying a servant, I'm paying a debt," Merriweather spluttered. "But that's not how this works, it is today," Yancy interrupted. He turned to Pearlie and extended his hand. "Miss, you're free to go wherever you please. The debt is settled." Pearlie stared at him, disbelief etched across her features. I don't understand." "There's nothing to understand," Yancy said gently. "No one owns you, not anymore." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the crowd. Holloway stood up, swaying slightly. "You can't just change the rules, Cowboy. If you don't want her, I'll take her off your hands for 500. Yancy's eyes hardened as he turned to face the drunk. "The lady is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone." Holloway's hand moved to his belt where a pistol hung, but the cold look in Yancy's eyes made him reconsider. Grumbling, he turned and staggered out of the hall, followed by several disappointed bidders. Merriweather, sensing the shift in the room, quickly announced the auction closed and began gathering his things. Pearlie slowly stepped down from the platform, still wary, still confused. "Why?" she asked when she reached Yancy. "Why would you spend all that money for a stranger?" Yancy looked down at her, seeing for the first time how young she truly was. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and despite the tears and fear, he could see kindness in her eyes. "Because no one should be sold like cattle," he said simply. "I was heading to the hotel for the night before riding back to my ranch tomorrow. You're welcome to take a room there as well on my account. After that, you can decide what you want to do." Pearlie felt a lump form in her throat. "I have nowhere to go. My parents' home was taken and I don't have any family left." Yancy nodded thoughtfully. "There's a widow in town, Mrs. Fletcher. She sometimes takes in girls who need work and a place to stay. I can introduce you before I leave." "Thank you," Pearlie whispered, still not quite believing her change in fortune. "I don't even know your name." "Yancy." "Yancy Young," he replied with a small smile. "And you are—" "Pearlie Vance," she said, managing a curtsy despite her shabby dress. "I'm in your debt, Mr. Young." "No," he said firmly. "You're not in anyone's debt. That's the whole point." As they stepped out into the harsh sunlight of the Dakota afternoon, Pearlie felt a strange mixture of fear and hope. Her future, which had seemed so terrifyingly certain just minutes ago, was now a blank page. Frightening, yes, but also full of possibility. Neither Pearlie nor Yancy knew it then. But that afternoon in Fargo would mark the beginning of a journey neither had expected, one that would take them through danger and joy, heartbreak and healing, and ultimately, to a love that neither had dared to imagine possible. Yancy escorted Pearlie to the Grand Hotel, a two-story building that was the pride of Fargo despite its modest appearance by Eastern standards. The lobby was furnished with velvet upholstered chairs and a gleaming oak reception desk. Several patrons glanced their way as they entered. A tall, rugged cowboy and a disheveled young woman made an odd pair. "Mr. Young," the clerk greeted him with a nod. "Back from the cattle sale already?" "Yes, Thomas," Yancy replied. "I need a second room, please, for Miss Vance." The clerk's eyes flicked to Pearlie, taking in her tear-stained face and simple dress. His expression remained professional, but Pearlie could read the assumptions in his eyes. "Of course. Adjoining rooms are available on the second floor." "Separate rooms," Yancy clarified firmly. "And please send up a hot bath and some supper for Miss Vance. She's had a trying day." Thomas nodded, clearly reassessing the situation. "Yes, sir. Martha can bring up the bath right away." As Yancy paid for the arrangements, Pearlie stood awkwardly in the lobby, acutely aware of her appearance. Her dress, once her Sunday best, was now worn and dirty from weeks of wear. She hadn't had a proper bath since before her parents died, making do with quick washes in cold water at the creditor's house where she'd been kept. Your key, Miss Vance, Thomas said, handing it to her with more respect than he'd initially shown. Room 204. Martha will be up shortly with your bath, and supper will follow. Thank you, Pearlie murmured, clutching the key as if it might disappear. Yancy guided her toward the stairs. I'll see you settled, then leave you to rest. We can talk about arrangements for tomorrow over breakfast, if that suits you. Pearlie nodded, feeling overwhelmed by his kindness. Mr. Young, I don't know how I'll ever repay. There's nothing to repay, he interrupted gently. Just get some rest. Pearlie's room was simple but luxurious to her eyes, a clean bed with fresh linens, a small writing desk, a wardrobe, and a window overlooking the main street. Martha, a plump woman with kind eyes, arrived with two young boys carrying a copper tub, followed by several trips with buckets of steaming water. There you go, miss, Martha said when the bath was ready. Soap's there on the side, and I brought some lavender oil. Good for the nerves it is. Supper will be up in an hour, beef stew and fresh bread tonight. When everyone had left, Pearlie stripped off her grimy clothes and sank into the hot water, tears of relief streaming down her face. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly relax, the warmth seeping into her bones. As she scrubbed away the dirt of her ordeal, she thought about Yancy Young. His quiet strength and unwavering principles had saved her from a fate she couldn't bear to contemplate. But what would happen tomorrow? Would he simply introduce her to this Mrs. Fletcher and ride away? The thought brought an unexpected pang of sadness. After her bath, Pearlie found a simple cotton nightgown had been laid out on the bed, likely at Yancy's request. It was too large but clean and soft. She'd just finished braiding her damp hair when a knock announced her supper. The stew was hearty and flavorful, the first proper meal she'd had in weeks. As she ate, Pearlie gazed out the window at the bustling street below. Fargo was growing rapidly, the railroad having reached it just a few years earlier. Wagons rumbled past, cowboys and townspeople mingled on the boardwalks, and the saloon across the street buzzed with activity. She was free. The realization hit her anew, free but also alone and penniless. What skills did she have? She could cook well, her mother had taught her from a young age. She could keep house so adequately and had a fair hand with numbers from helping at her parents' restaurant. Would that be enough to secure a position with this Mrs. Fletcher? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Miss Vance, it's Yancy Young. She opened the door to find him standing there, hat in hand. He'd clearly visited the bathhouse himself. His dark hair was damp, and he'd changed into a clean shirt and trousers. I just wanted to ensure you had everything you needed, he said. Yes, thank you. The bath and meal were wonderful. Pearlie hesitated, then asked, Have you spoken with Mrs. Fletcher? I sent a note to her house. She'll meet us for breakfast tomorrow at 8, if that's agreeable, of course. Pearlie bit her lip. Mr. Young, may I ask, why are you doing all this? You've spent a fortune already. Yancy's blue eyes held hers for a moment before he glanced away. I know what it's like to be alone in the world, Miss Vance. When I was 12, my parents were killed in a Sioux raid on our homestead. I was found wandering by an old rancher named Henry Watson. He took me in, raised me as his own. He looked back at her. He didn't have to do that, but he did. I suppose I'm just following his example. He sounds like a good man. The best I've ever known. He passed 3 years ago and left me his ranch. Everything I have I owe to his kindness. Pearlie nodded, understanding dawning. So you're paying it forward. A small smile touched Yancy's lips. I suppose I am. Get some rest, Miss Vance. Tomorrow will be a new beginning for you. After he left, Pearlie lay in the soft bed staring at the ceiling. A new beginning. The phrase echoed in her mind as she drifted off to sleep. The image of Yancy's kind blue eyes following her into her dreams. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the window. For a moment, Pearlie was disoriented, unused to the comfort of a real bed after months of sleeping on a thin pallet in the creditor's attic. Then the events of the previous day came flooding back, and she sat up, a mixture of anxiety and hope coursing through her. A knock at the door revealed Martha with a fresh dress and undergarments. Mr. Young had these sent over from the mercantile, the woman explained, laying out a simple but well-made blue calico dress. Said you might need something fresh to wear. Pearlie's throat tightened with emotion. Another kindness she couldn't repay. The dress fit well enough, though it was a bit loose around her waist, evidence of the meals she'd missed in recent months. At precisely 8 o'clock, she met Yancy in the hotel dining room. He stood when she approached, and for the first time she truly noticed how handsome he was. Tall and broad-shouldered, with features that spoke of both strength and gentleness. His dark hair fell across his forehead in a way that made her fingers itch to brush it back. "Miss Vance," he greeted her with a nod, "you look well rested. Thank you, and thank you for the dress, it's lovely." "It's nothing," he said, clearly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Mrs. Fletcher should be here shortly. She's a good woman, strict but fair. She runs a boarding house for young women on the edge of town." As if on cue, the dining room door opened to admit a tall, imposing woman in her 50s. Her gray-streaked black hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she surveyed the room with sharp eyes before spotting Yancy and making her way toward them. "Mr. Young," she said, extending a gloved hand, "your note was intriguing, to say the least. Mrs. Fletcher, thank you for coming. This is Miss Pearlie Vance." The older woman's assessing gaze swept over Pearlie, who fought the urge to fidget. "Miss Vance, I understand you're in need of employment and lodging." "Yes, madam," Pearlie replied, straightening her spine. "I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean and I'm quick with figures." Mrs. Fletcher's eyebrow rose slightly. "Indeed, and how did you come to be in your current situation, if I may ask?" Pearlie glanced at Yancy, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she recounted the story of her parents' deaths, the crushing debt, and finally, the auction. She kept her voice steady, determined not to appear weak before this formidable woman. "I see," Mrs. Fletcher said when she finished. "And you, Mr. Young, intervened out of—" "Charity, out of common decency," Yancy corrected her, a hint of steel in his voice. Mrs. Fletcher's lips twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. "Common decency is uncommonly rare these days." She turned back to Pearlie. "I run a respectable establishment, Miss Vance. My girls work hard, but they are treated with respect and paid a fair wage. I currently have a need for someone to assist in the kitchen. It would mean early mornings and long days, but you would have your own small room and 2 days off each month." Hope bloomed in Pearlie's chest. "I would be very grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Fletcher. There is one matter that concerns me," the older woman continued. "That auction, while distasteful, was legal. There may be questions about your status." "I've taken care of that," Yancy interjected. "I visited the bank this morning when it opened. I've settled all remaining debts in the Vance name and have the documents to prove it. Miss Vance is legally free of any obligations." Pearlie stared at him, stunned. How much more money had he spent on her behalf? Mrs. Fletcher nodded approvingly. "Very thorough, Mr. Young. Well, Miss Vance, if you're amenable, you can gather your belongings and return with me after breakfast." "I don't have any belongings," Pearlie admitted softly. "I see. Well, we can address that in time. I'll wait while you finish your meal, after Mrs. Fletcher moved to another table to give them privacy. Pearlie turned to Yancy, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You paid off the rest of my family's debt. After everything else," Yancy shifted uncomfortably, "it wasn't much, and this way no one can challenge your freedom." "I don't know what to say. Say you'll work hard and make a good life for yourself," he replied simply. "That's all the thanks I need." They ate their breakfast mostly in silence, Pearlie trying to absorb the rapid changes in her circumstances. When it was time to leave, she stood awkwardly before Yancy. "I suppose this is goodbye then," she said, surprised by the sadness the words brought. "I suppose it is." He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch. "Take this. It's not much, but it will help you get started." Pearlie shook her head firmly. "No, Mr. Young, you've done far too much already. Please," he insisted. "Henry, my adoptive father, always said that a person needs 3 things to start fresh: their freedom and opportunity and a little seed money to grow. You have the first 2 now. Take the third." Reluctantly, Pearlie accepted the pouch, feeling the weight of coins inside. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome, Miss Vance." He tipped his hat. "Good luck to you." Mrs. Fletcher was already heading for the door. With one last look at the man who had saved her, Pearlie followed. Fletcher House stood on the eastern edge of Fargo, a large, well-maintained two-story building with a wide porch. As Mrs. Fletcher led Pearlie inside, she explained the rules: no men allowed upstairs, a strict curfew, mandatory church attendance on Sundays, and absolute honesty at all times. "We currently have 8 young women living here," Mrs. Fletcher said as they climbed the stairs. "All work in respectable positions around town as shop assistants, seamstresses, or here in the house. Your duties will primarily involve helping Mrs. Pierce, our cook, but you'll also assist with laundry and cleaning as needed." Pearlie's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a tiny window overlooking the kitchen garden. After the creditor's attic and the threat of being sold, it felt like a palace. "Rest today," Mrs. Fletcher instructed. "Familiarize yourself with the house. You'll begin work at 5 tomorrow morning." That evening, Pearlie met the other boarders, a diverse group of young women ranging from 16 to 25. Most were cordial if reserved, though a tall blonde named Sarah immediately took Pearlie under her wing, showing her around and explaining the unwritten rules of Fletcher House. "Mrs. Fletcher seems strict, but she's fair," Sarah confided as they sat on the back porch after dinner. "She's helped every girl here escape some difficult situation or another. She was a mail-order bride herself, came out to marry some farmer who turned out to be a drunk and a brute. After he died, she used the land he left to build this place." "What about you?" Pearlie asked. "How did you end up here?" Sarah's smile faltered. "My father lost everything in the panic of '73. He headed west to find work, leaving me and Mama behind. When Mama got sick, I had no way to pay for medicine. Mrs. Fletcher found me crying outside the doctor's office and brought me here. Mama didn't make it, but I had a roof over my head and honest work." "I'm sorry about your mother," Pearlie said softly. "Life's hard out here," Sarah replied with a shrug that didn't quite hide her pain. "But we survive, and sometimes, if we're lucky, good people like Mrs. Fletcher or your cowboy come along when we need them most." "He's not my cowboy," Pearlie protested, feeling her cheeks warm. Sarah's knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. "He's still in town, you know. I saw him at the Mercantile this afternoon." Pearlie's heart gave an unexpected leap. "He said he was leaving today." "Well, he hasn't yet. Word is he paid off your family's debts and then some. Quite the gallant gesture." That night, lying in her new bed, Pearlie found her thoughts returning to Yancy Young. His quiet strength, his unflinching morality, the gentleness in his blue eyes when he spoke to her. Why hadn't he left town as planned? And why did the thought of him still being in Fargo make her pulse quicken? She told herself it was simply gratitude, nothing more. After all, what could a penniless orphan possibly offer a man like him? Better to focus on her new beginning, the opportunity he had given her. With that resolution firmly in mind, she drifted off to sleep. The next few days passed in a blur of new routines and responsibilities. Mrs. Pierce, the cook, was a round, cheerful woman who quickly recognized Pearlie's skill in the kitchen and gave her increasing responsibility. By the end of the first week, Pearlie was preparing entire meals under Mrs. Pierce's supervision and receiving praise from the boarders. "You've got a gift, girl," Mrs. Pierce declared after Pearlie's apple pie drew compliments from even the usually taciturn Mrs. Fletcher. "Your mama taught you well." "She did," Pearlie agreed, a bittersweet pang in her heart at the memory. "Our restaurant wasn't fancy, but people came from miles around for her cooking." "Restaurant, eh? No wonder you know your way around a kitchen." Life at Fletcher House settled into a comfortable pattern. Up at dawn to help prepare breakfast, cleaning and laundry through the morning, lunch preparation, a brief rest in the afternoon, then dinner and evening chores. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time since her parents' deaths, Pearlie felt safe and purposeful. She heard nothing of Yancy Young and tried to convince herself she wasn't disappointed. He had his own life to return to: his ranch, his cattle, his future plans that had nothing to do with a girl he'd helped on a charitable impulse. The money he'd given her remained untouched in the pouch, hidden beneath her mattress. Someday, she promised herself, she would find a way to return it, along with everything else he'd spent on her behalf. 2 weeks after her arrival at Fletcher House, Mrs. Fletcher summoned Pearlie to her private sitting room, an unusual occurrence that sent a flutter of anxiety through the young woman. "You wanted to see me, Mrs. Fletcher?" she asked, standing nervously before the older woman's desk. "Yes, Miss Vance, please sit." Mrs. Fletcher gestured to a chair. "I've been observing your work these past weeks, and I must say I'm impressed. Mrs. Pierce speaks highly of your skills in the kitchen." "Thank you, madam. I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Yes, well," Mrs. Fletcher folded her hands on the desk. "An opportunity of a different sort has arisen, and I wanted to discuss it with you. The Occidental Hotel has approached me seeking a qualified cook's assistant. Their current head cook, Mr. Jameson, is getting on in years and needs capable help. The position pays considerably more than what I can offer you here, includes room and board at the hotel, and could potentially lead to a head cook position in time." Pearlie blinked in surprise. "You're suggesting I take this position?" "I am considering recommending you, yes, Mrs." Fletcher's stern expression softened slightly. "Don't misunderstand, your work here has been exemplary, and I would be sorry to lose you. But part of my purpose with this house is to help young women establish themselves independently. This would be a significant step forward for you." "I don't know what to say," Pearlie admitted. "I've grown comfortable here." "Comfort can be a trap, Miss Vance. Growth rarely happens within its confines." Mrs. Fletcher studied her for a moment. "There is one other factor you should be aware of. The position became available because the Occidental is expanding. They've recently been purchased by a new owner who's investing considerably in improvements." "A new owner?" "Yes, Mr. Yancy Young." Pearlie felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. "Mr. Young bought the Occidental Hotel." Mrs. Fletcher's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Indeed. Apparently, cattle ranching is only one of his business interests. He purchased the hotel last week and has already begun renovations. The staff speaks well of him, fair wages, reasonable expectations, and plans to make the Occidental the finest establishment between St. Paul and Helena." Pearlie's mind raced. Yancy hadn't left Fargo after all. He'd bought a hotel, a major investment that suggested he planned to remain in the area for some time. And now, through Mrs. Fletcher, he was offering her a position. Was it coincidence, or had he engineered this opportunity specifically for her? "You don't have to decide immediately, Mrs." Fletcher continued. "Mr. Jameson has agreed to interview several candidates next Monday. Should you wish to be among them, you would have my recommendation." "I would like that very much," Pearlie heard herself say, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you for considering me. Very good." "I'll inform Mr. Jameson." Mrs. Fletcher's penetrating gaze held Pearlie's for a moment. "One piece of advice, Miss Vance. Whatever your feelings toward Mr. Young, and I suspect they are complex, remember that in matters of business, clarity is essential. If you take this position, it should be because it advances your own goals, not out of gratitude or other sentiments." Pearlie felt heat rise to her cheeks. Was she so transparent? "I understand. Thank you for your counsel." All weekend, Pearlie's thoughts churned with the prospect of the new position and the possibility of seeing Yancy again. By Monday morning, she had convinced herself that his involvement was merely coincidental. He had purchased the hotel as a business investment. The need for kitchen help was legitimate. Mrs. Fletcher had recommended her on her own merits. There was no reason to believe he even remembered her, let alone had arranged things on her behalf. This rational assessment, however, did nothing to calm the butterflies in her stomach as she put on her best dress, still the blue calico he had purchased for her, and made her way to the Occidental Hotel for her interview. The hotel was already showing signs of renovation: fresh paint on the exterior, new glass in the windows, and a polished brass plaque declaring the Occidental Hotel above the entrance. Inside, the lobby had been transformed with new furniture, gleaming woodwork, and tasteful decorations that gave the space an air of sophistication without ostentation. "May I help you, miss?" asked the clerk at the front desk. "I'm Pearlie Vance." "I have an interview with Mr. Jameson for the cook's assistant position." "Ah, yes. Please follow me to the kitchen." The kitchen was a hive of activity, far larger and better equipped than the one at Fletcher House. Steam rose from massive pots, assistants chopped vegetables at long tables, and in the center of it all stood a tall, thin man with iron-gray hair and the bearing of a general commanding troops. "Mr. Jameson," the clerk called. "Miss Vance for her interview." The head cook looked up from inspecting a roast, his sharp eyes taking in Pearlie from head to toe. "Miss Vance, Eliza Fletcher speaks highly of you, says you have a natural talent in the kitchen." "Mrs. Fletcher is very kind," Pearlie replied. "I learned from my mother, who ran a restaurant here in Fargo before she passed." "The Vance eating house on Front Street?" Jameson asked, his expression changing. "Well, why didn't you say so? Amelia Vance's daughter, your mother's chicken and dumplings were the best in the territory." Pearlie felt a surge of pride and grief. "You knew my mother's cooking, knew it, and envied it," Jameson admitted with a chuckle. "She had a way with pastry that I've never mastered. Now, let's see what you've learned from her. I need a dozen apple tarts for tonight's dinner. Show me your skills." For the next hour, Pearlie worked under Jameson's watchful eye, preparing a batch of tarts from the recipe her mother had perfected. The familiar process calmed her nerves, measuring flour, cutting in butter, adding just enough ice water to form the perfect dough, then rolling it thin and filling it with sliced apples tossed with cinnamon, sugar, and a hint of nutmeg. As the tarts baked, filling the kitchen with their tantalizing aroma, Jameson nodded approvingly. "Your technique is sound. Let's see how they taste." When the tarts emerged from the oven, golden and fragrant, Jameson tasted one and closed his eyes. Amelia's recipe, no doubt about it. "You've got the job, Miss Vance, if you want it. 6 days a week, Sundays off, $5 a week plus room and board." It was more money than Pearlie had ever earned, more than most women in Fargo made. "Thank you, Mr. Jameson. I would be honored to accept." "Excellent. You can start next Monday. That will give Mrs. Fletcher time to find your replacement." Jameson paused, a hint of amusement crossing his weathered face. "I should mention that the owner has taken a particular interest in the kitchen. Mr. Young believes that the quality of food is as important as comfortable beds and clean rooms in building the hotel's reputation." "I'm sure Mr. Young has high standards for all aspects of his business," Pearlie replied carefully. "Indeed he does." "Speaking of which," Jameson broke off as the kitchen door swung open. Yancy Young stood in the doorway, as tall and commanding as Pearlie remembered. He wore a tailored suit rather than the trail clothes she'd seen him in before, but his bearing was unmistakable: the quiet confidence, the straight shoulders, the direct gaze that seemed to see right through pretense. For a moment, their eyes met across the busy kitchen, and Pearlie felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. Then his expression smoothed into polite interest. "Mr. Jameson," he said, approaching them, "how are the preparations for tonight's dinner coming along?" "On schedule, Mr. Young. And I've just hired our new assistant cook, Miss Pearlie Vance." Yancy turned to her, and if Pearlie hadn't been watching closely, she might have missed the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Miss Vance, what a fortunate coincidence. I trust Mr. Jameson's offer was satisfactory." "Very much so," Pearlie replied, studying his face. Was it truly coincidence that had brought them together again, or something more deliberate? "Excellent. The Occidental aims to be the finest hotel in the territory, and that requires the finest staff." He looked at the cooling tarts. "Your work, I presume?" "Yes, sir. May I?" At Jameson's nod, Yancy took one of the tarts and bit into it. A look of genuine pleasure crossed his face. "Remarkable. If this is an indication of your skills, Miss Vance, you'll be a valuable addition to our team." "Thank you, Mr. Young." He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary, then turned back to Jameson. "I'll leave you to finalize the arrangements. Miss Vance, welcome to the Occidental." With that, he was gone, leaving Pearlie with the distinct impression that their reunion had been anything but coincidental. The week passed quickly as Pearlie prepared to transition from Fletcher House to the Occidental. Mrs. Fletcher helped her select some additional clothing with the money Yancy had given her: practical dresses for work and one nicer outfit for her day off. The other boarders organized a small farewell gathering the night before her departure, with Sarah presenting her with a hand-knitted shawl. "You'll be just down the street," Sarah said as they hugged goodbye. We'll still see each other at church and around town." "Of course we will," Pearlie assured her, touched by the friendship that had developed between them. "And you must visit me at the hotel kitchen sometime. I'll save something sweet for you." Mrs. Fletcher's parting words were typically direct but surprisingly warm. "You've done well here, Miss Vance. Remember what I said about clarity in business matters, but don't let caution close your heart to possibilities. Life offers few second chances, recognize them when they appear." Pearlie's room at the Occidental was considerably larger than her quarters at Fletcher House, with a real bed, a dresser with a mirror, a small writing desk, and even a rocking chair near the window. It was located on the top floor in the staff wing, but the furnishings were nearly as nice as those in the guest rooms. Her first day in the kitchen passed in a blur of new routines, recipes to learn, and staff to meet. Mr. Jameson ran a tight operation but treated his people fairly, and Pearlie quickly found her place in the hierarchy. By day's end, she had helped prepare dinner for 30 guests, learned the hotel's system for ordering supplies, and earned a rare word of praise from Jameson for her chicken stock. "Miss Vance," Jameson called as she was preparing to retire for the night. "Mr. Young would like to see you in his office." Pearlie's heart jumped. "Now, yes, don't worry, he often meets with new staff during their first week. His office is down the hall from the lobby, last door on the right." Suddenly conscious of her appearance after a long day in the hot kitchen, Pearlie smoothed her hair and straightened her apron before making her way to Yancy's office. She knocked softly on the door. "Enter," came his voice from within. Yancy sat behind a large desk, reviewing what appeared to be architectural drawings. He looked up when she entered, and a smile touched his lips. "Miss Vance, please sit down." He gestured to a chair across from him. "How was your first day?" "Very good, thank you," she replied, perching on the edge of the seat. "Mr. Jameson runs an efficient kitchen." "He does indeed, one of the finest cooks in the territory." Yancy set aside the drawings and leaned back in his chair, studying her. "And how do you find your accommodations?" "They're lovely, far more comfortable than I'm accustomed to." He nodded, seeming pleased. "Good, I want all my staff to be comfortable. Happy employees make for happy guests, in my experience." There was a moment of silence, and Pearlie gathered her courage. "Mr. Young, may I ask you something directly?" "Of course." "Is it merely coincidence that I've ended up working in your hotel after everything that happened?" Yancy held her gaze steadily. "No, Miss Vance, it is not. When I learned that the Occidental was for sale, I saw an opportunity both for a good investment and to create a position that might suit your skills. I asked Mrs. Fletcher about your progress, and she spoke highly of your abilities in the kitchen. So you arranged this job for me. I suggested to Jameson that we needed additional kitchen staff and that Mrs. Fletcher might know of suitable candidates. The decision to hire you was his alone, based on your merits." He paused. "Does that trouble you?" Pearlie considered the question. Did it trouble her? On one hand, she valued her independence and didn't want to feel beholden to anyone. On the other, she couldn't deny the opportunity was perfect for her skills and ambitions. "I'm not sure," she admitted finally. "I'm grateful for the position, but I don't want charity." "It isn't charity," Yancy said firmly. "It's an opportunity, nothing more. What you make of it is entirely up to you. Jameson wouldn't have hired you if he didn't believe in your abilities, regardless of my interest in your welfare." "Your interest in my welfare," she repeated softly. "Why do you care what happens to me, Mr. Young? You've already done more than most would dream of doing for a stranger." Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "Perhaps I don't see you as a stranger anymore, Miss Vance." The simple statement sent a wave of warmth through Pearlie. Before she could respond, Yancy continued in a more businesslike tone. "In any case, I wanted to assure you that your position here is based on merit. You'll be judged by the same standards as any other employee, and I expect you'll exceed them handily." He smiled slightly. "Now, unless you have other concerns, I won't keep you any longer. You must be tired after your first day. Thank you, Mr. Young, for everything." Pearlie rose, still trying to process their conversation. "One more thing, Miss Vance," he said as she reached the door. I'll be hosting a small dinner party next Saturday for some of Fargo's business leaders. I've asked Jameson to prepare a special menu, and I'd like you to be involved. I understand from Mrs. Fletcher that you have some signature dishes from your parents' restaurant. Yes, several. My mother's chicken and dumplings were particularly popular. Excellent. Please work with Jameson to incorporate them into the menu. I want to showcase local talent, and your family's recipes are part of Fargo's history. The acknowledgement of her family's legacy brought unexpected tears to Pearlie's eyes. I would be honored, Mr. Young. As she returned to her room, Pearlie's mind whirled with conflicting emotions. Yancy Young remained an enigma, a successful businessman who had gone out of his way to help her, not once but repeatedly. Was it merely kindness driving his actions, or something more? And why did the possibility of something more make her heart beat faster? Over the next 2 weeks, Pearlie threw herself into her work at the Occidental. Under Jameson's tutelage, she refined her cooking skills and learned the finer points of hotel cuisine. The dinner party Yancy had mentioned became her primary focus, a chance to honor her parents' legacy by recreating her mother's signature dishes for Fargo's elite. Yancy himself was often absent during this period, traveling to Bismarck and St. Paul on hotel business. When he was in Fargo, their interactions were brief and professional, though Pearlie couldn't help noticing how his gaze lingered on her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking. The night of the dinner party arrived with a flurry of activity in the kitchen. Pearlie had spent the day preparing her mother's chicken and dumplings, along with the apple tarts that had secured her position. As the guests began to arrive, bankers, merchants, the mayor, and even the editor of the Fargo Times, her nerves threatened to overwhelm her. "Steady now," Jameson advised, noticing her shaking hands as she added the final touches to the dumplings. "It's just food, Miss Vance, good food to be sure, but nothing to fret about." "It's more than that," she admitted. "It's my mother's recipe, her legacy." Jameson's expression softened. "Then do her proud. I'll handle the beef course. You focus on getting those dumplings perfect." When the chicken and dumplings were served, Pearlie held her breath, waiting in the kitchen for the guests' reaction. Jameson had insisted she take credit for the dish, and Yancy had arranged for the servers to announce it as Miss Vance's family recipe, a Fargo tradition. Minutes later, Yancy himself appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expression warm. "Miss Vance, your dish is the talk of the table. The mayor has already asked for seconds, and Mrs. Whitfield is demanding the recipe." Pride swelled in Pearlie's chest. "My mother would be pleased." "The guests have requested that the chef make an appearance," Yancy continued. "Would you join us for a moment, Jameson as well, of course?" Pearlie glanced down at her flour-dusted apron. "Like this, a chef in clean clothes would raise suspicions about the food," Yancy replied with a smile. "Come as you are, they want to thank the person who created such a memorable meal." Nervously, Pearlie followed Yancy and Jameson into the private dining room. 12 of Fargo's most prominent citizens sat around a large table, all turning to look at her as she entered. To her surprise, they broke into spontaneous applause. "Miss Vance," the mayor called, raising his glass. "Your chicken and dumplings remind me of why I chose to make Fargo my home. Such talent must not be lost." "Indeed," added a severe-looking woman Pearlie recognized as the banker's wife. "Young woman, that recipe is a treasure." Pearlie felt her cheeks flush with pleasure. "Thank you." "The recipe was my mother's, Amelia Vance. She ran the Vance Eating House on Front Street before she passed." "Amelia Vance," exclaimed an older gentleman. "I remember her establishment well. Best meals in the territory. Such a loss when it closed." "Which brings me to an announcement," Yancy said, moving to stand beside Pearlie. "As some of you know, the Occidental is undergoing renovations. Part of our plan includes opening a proper restaurant adjacent to the hotel, not merely a dining room for guests, but an establishment open to the public, serving the finest food in Dakota Territory." Murmurs of interest circulated around the table. Pearlie looked at Yancy in surprise. This was the first she'd heard of such plans. "Tonight's meal has confirmed what I already suspected," Yancy continued. Fargo has a culinary tradition worth preserving and celebrating. Therefore, I'm pleased to announce that our new restaurant will be called Amelia's in honor of Mrs. Vance's contribution to our community's history. Pearlie's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Yancy turned to her, his expression gentle. With your permission, of course, Miss Vance, and with the hope that you might consider taking a leading role in the kitchen there, under Mr. Jameson's supervision initially and perhaps independently in time. I don't know what to say, Pearlie managed, overwhelmed by the gesture. Say yes, girl, Jameson urged quietly. It's a fine opportunity and well-deserved. Yes, Pearlie said, finding her voice. Yes, I would be honored. More applause followed, and the banker raised his glass in a toast. To Amelia's and to Miss Vance, for bringing her mother's talents back to Fargo. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and questions about the new restaurant. When the guests finally departed, Pearlie found herself alone with Yancy in the emptied dining room, still trying to process what had happened. You've made quite an impression, Yancy observed, helping her gather the last of the dishes despite her protests. Mrs. Whitfield rarely compliments anyone, and she asked for your recipe twice. I still can't believe you're naming the restaurant after my mother, Pearlie said, shaking her head in wonder. Why would you do that? Yancy set down the stack of plates he was carrying and turned to face her fully. Because it's the right thing to do. Your mother's cooking was part of what made Fargo special. That deserves to be remembered. But you never even tasted her food. No, he admitted with a small smile, but I've tasted yours. And if tonight is any indication, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Their eyes met, and Pearlie felt something shift between them, a recognition that went beyond employer and employee, beyond benefactor and recipient. For a moment they were simply a man and a woman, standing close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Mr. Young, she began. Yancy, he corrected gently. After everything, I think you could call me Yancy when we're not in formal company. Yancy, she repeated, liking the feel of his name on her lips. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done, first the auction, then the position here, and now this. You don't need to thank me, he said, his voice low. Seeing you flourish is thanks enough. Before Pearlie could respond, Jameson's voice called from the kitchen, breaking the moment. Miss Vance, these dishes won't wash themselves. Yancy stepped back, his professional demeanor returning. You should go, it's been a long night. Yes, Pearlie agreed, suddenly aware of how close they had been standing. Good night, Yancy. Good night, Pearlie. As she returned to the kitchen, Pearlie knew something fundamental had changed. The way he had looked at her, the way he had said her name, there was more than professional interest there. And if she was honest with herself, her own feelings had grown beyond gratitude into something deeper and more complicated. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as renovations for Amelia's restaurant progressed. Yancy involved Pearlie in every aspect of the planning, from reviewing the architect's designs to selecting china and linens. Jameson began training her more intensively, focusing on the management aspects of running a restaurant kitchen. You've got the cooking skills, he told her one afternoon as they inventoried supplies. Now you need to learn the business side. Ordering, staffing, budgeting, it's not all creative work, you know. You think I'll actually be running the kitchen at Amelia's? Pearlie asked, still not quite believing it. Eventually, yes. Mr. Young sees something in you, girl. Don't disappoint him or me. Their time together gave Pearlie and Yancy opportunities to know each other beyond their initial meeting. She learned that he had built his ranch from nothing after Henry Watson's death, expanding it through smart breeding and careful management. The hotel was his first venture beyond ranching, but he approached it with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made his cattle operations successful. In turn, Pearlie shared stories of her childhood in Fargo, her parents' dreams for their restaurant, and the happiness they had known before debt and fire had taken everything. Yancy listened with genuine interest, sometimes asking questions that showed how carefully he was paying attention. As autumn painted the Dakota prairie in shades of gold and amber, their relationship deepened. Yancy began inviting Pearlie to accompany him on walks through town on her days off, ostensibly to discuss plans for the restaurant, but increasingly to simply enjoy each other's company. Though he maintained a respectful distance, his eyes often held a warmth that made Pearlie's heart race. One Sunday in late October, they visited the site of her parents' former restaurant, now rebuilt as a hardware store. Pearlie stood silently, memories washing over her. "They would be proud of you," Yancy said softly, standing beside her, "taking their legacy forward in a new way." "I hope so," she replied. "Sometimes I worry that I'm forgetting them. Their faces aren't as clear in my memory as they once were. Do you have any photographs?" Pearlie shook her head sadly. "Everything was lost in the fire. I don't even have a daguerreotype to remember them by." Yancy was quiet for a moment, then offered his arm. "It's getting chilly. Shall we head back?" As they walked, their conversation turned to the upcoming opening of Amelia's, scheduled for the first week of November. The renovations were nearly complete, the menu finalized, and staff had been hired. Only one major decision remained. "We need to select a portrait for the entrance," Yancy said as they approached the hotel. "I'd like to have a painting of your mother to hang by the door to explain the name to customers and honor her properly." Pearlie stopped walking, a lump forming in her throat. "But as I said, I have no photographs. I've hired an artist from St. Paul who specializes in creating portraits from descriptions," Yancy explained. "If you could describe your mother in detail, he believes he can create a reasonable likeness." "You would do that?" Pearlie asked, deeply moved. "Commission a portrait based only on my recollections." "Of course." His voice was gentle. "Your mother's memory deserves to be preserved, not just in recipes but in image as well." Impulsively, Pearlie reached for his hand. "Thank you for understanding how important this is." Yancy's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "You're welcome, Pearlie." They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, something unspoken passing between them. Then, with a small smile, Yancy released her hand and opened the hotel door. "The artist arrives tomorrow. We'll make time for you to meet with him." The portrait session proved to be both painful and healing for Pearlie. For hours, she described her mother to the artist, her warm brown eyes, the laugh lines around her mouth, the way she wore her hair pinned up while cooking but let it down in the evenings, the shape of her hands that had taught Pearlie everything she knew about cooking. Yancy sat quietly in the corner of the room during these sessions, occasionally asking a clarifying question, but mostly just providing silent support. His presence made the difficult task easier somehow, and Pearlie found herself drawing strength from his quiet confidence. When the artist unveiled the completed portrait 3 days later, Pearlie gasped. Though not a perfect likeness, he had captured something essential about Amelia Vance: the warmth in her eyes, the hint of a smile that suggested she was about to share a beloved recipe or piece of wisdom. "It's her," Pearlie whispered, tears flowing freely. "Not exactly, but her spirit is there." "Then it's perfect for our purpose," Yancy said, standing beside her. "Your mother will welcome every guest who enters Amelia's." The day before the restaurant's grand opening, a package arrived for Pearlie. Inside, she found a beautiful dress of deep blue silk, far finer than anything she had ever owned, along with a note in Yancy's handwriting: "For tomorrow's celebration. You should shine as brightly as your mother's legacy." "Why?" Pearlie held the dress against herself, admiring the way the fabric caught the light. It was the kind of dress she had only ever seen on wealthy women visiting from the East, elegant but not ostentatious, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Sarah, visiting to help Pearlie prepare for the opening, whistled appreciatively. "That man is courting you properly, Pearlie Vance. A dress like that isn't just a gift, it's a declaration." "Don't be silly," Pearlie protested, though her heart beat faster at the thought. "He's my employer." "He's a man who looks at you like you hung the moon," Sarah countered. "And don't pretend you haven't noticed." Pearlie couldn't deny it any longer. Over the past months, Yancy's kindness had evolved into something more, and her own feelings had deepened in response. Still, doubts plagued her. He was successful, respected, wealthy by Fargo standards, and she was a penniless orphan who had nearly been sold at auction. Could he truly see her as an equal? Or was his interest merely an extension of his charitable impulse? The opening of Amelia's was a triumph beyond anyone's expectations. The dining room was filled to capacity, with Fargo's finest citizens eager to sample the famous Vance family recipes. Pearlie, wearing Yancy's gift, divided her time between supervising the kitchen and greeting guests alongside Jameson. The portrait of Amelia Vance hung in a place of honor near the entrance, drawing compliments and sparking conversations about the original Vance eating house. Several older patrons shared memories of Pearlie's parents, stories she hadn't heard before that she treasured like newly discovered jewels. As the evening wound down, with the last customers lingering over coffee and dessert, Yancy found Pearlie in a quiet corner of the kitchen, finally taking a moment to rest her tired feet. "You've done it," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "Amelia's is already the talk of the town." Jameson says 3 different people asked if they could book tables for next week. "We did it," Pearlie corrected him. "None of this would exist without you, perhaps, but without you it would be just another dining room." He paused, something different in his expression. "You look beautiful tonight, Pearlie. That color suits you." She smoothed the silk of her dress, suddenly shy. "Thank you for the gift. It's the finest thing I've ever owned." "It pales compared to the woman wearing it," Yancy said softly. Before Pearlie could respond, Jameson bustled in. "Miss Vance, the mayor is asking for your apple dumplings recipe again. His wife insists on trying to replicate it at home, though between us, she couldn't boil water without burning it." Pearlie laughed. "I'll go speak with them." The moment with Yancy broken, she returned to her duties, though his words echoed in her mind throughout the remainder of the evening. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and the kitchen was clean, Pearlie found herself alone with Yancy in the empty restaurant. The staff had been dismissed with thanks and promises of bonuses, leaving only the 2 of them to savor the success of the evening. "I have something for you," Yancy said, retrieving a small package from his office. A proper opening gift. Curious, Pearlie unwrapped the package to find a small, leather-bound book. Opening it, she discovered blank pages with recipes of Amelia's embossed on the first page in gold lettering. "For recording your mother's recipes and eventually your own," Yancy explained. "So they'll never be lost again." Pearlie ran her fingers over the fine leather, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect, thank you." "There's something else," Yancy continued, his expression growing serious. "Something I've been wanting to discuss with you." "Yes." Pearlie's heart began to race at his tone. Yancy took a deep breath. "When I first saw you on that auction block, I acted on instinct. I couldn't bear to see anyone treated that way, especially someone so young and vulnerable. But what began as an impulsive act of decency has led me somewhere unexpected." He took a step closer, his blue eyes intense. "Over these past months, as I've come to know you, your strength, your talent, your kindness, my feelings have changed, deepened." "Yancy," Pearlie whispered, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning. "I find myself thinking of you constantly," he continued, "admiring not just your cooking skills but your resilience, your grace under pressure, your willingness to embrace new challenges. I know there's a considerable difference in our circumstances, and I would never want you to feel obligated because of what happened at the auction or anything since." He took her hand gently in his. "But if you could see your way clear to allowing me to court you properly, it would make me the happiest man in Dakota Territory." Joy bloomed in Pearlie's chest, so intense it almost hurt. "I've been afraid," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Afraid that your interest in me stemmed only from pity or charity, that once I was established, you would move on to help someone else in need." "Never," Yancy said firmly. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with charity and everything to do with admiration and affection." "You've captured my heart, Pearlie Vance, thoroughly and completely." "And you've captured mine," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Yes, Yancy, I would very much like you to court me." His smile was radiant as he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then I shall, with all the propriety and respect you deserve." In that moment, standing amid the remnants of their shared triumph, Pearlie felt as if her life had come full circle. From the depths of despair on the auction block to this height of joy, with a man who saw her not as an object of pity, but as a woman worthy of love and respect, the courtship that followed was both proper and passionate. Yancy took Pearlie driving on Sunday afternoons, escorted her to church services, and brought her wildflowers from the prairie. They shared long conversations about their hopes and dreams, discovering a compatibility that went beyond their professional collaboration. Fargo society observed their growing relationship with interest, though not without some raised eyebrows. While Yancy's success had earned him respect, some still remembered Pearlie's near fate at the auction and considered her beneath a man of his standing. But for every disapproving glance, there were friends like Sarah and Mrs. Fletcher who delighted in their happiness. "Told you so," Sarah teased after Yancy had formally escorted Pearlie to the harvest dance. "That man has been sweet on you from the beginning, even the stern Mrs. Fletcher unbent enough to offer her blessing. "He's a good man, Miss Vance, the kind who sees value where others might not look. You've chosen well, or rather, you've been chosen well." Under Pearlie's guidance, Amelia's flourished, becoming known as the finest restaurant between Minneapolis and Helena. She expanded the menu beyond her mother's recipes, adding her own creations while maintaining the home-style quality that customers loved. Jameson, recognizing her talent, gradually stepped back, allowing her to assume more responsibility until she was effectively running the kitchen herself. Yancy, meanwhile, continued to expand his business interests, opening a second hotel in Bismarck and investing in the railroad that was pushing westward. His success brought wealth and influence, but he remained the same straightforward, honorable man who had raised his hand at the auction all those months ago. As winter settled over the Dakota Territory, bringing snow and biting winds, Pearlie and Yancy found warmth in their growing love. On Christmas Eve, after a special dinner at Amelia's for those in town without family, Yancy asked Pearlie to join him for a sleigh ride under the stars. Bundled in furs against the cold, they glided over the snow-covered prairie, the only sounds the jingle of the sleigh bells and the soft huff of the horse's breath in the frigid air. Yancy guided them to a small rise overlooking Fargo, now a glittering collection of lights in the darkness. "It's beautiful," Pearlie said, gazing at the town that had been the setting for both her greatest sorrows and her deepest joys. "Yes, it is," Yancy agreed, though his eyes were fixed on her rather than the view. "Pearlie, there's something I need to ask you." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it revealed a ring with a single perfect diamond set in gold. "I love you," he said simply. "I love your strength, your talent, your compassion. I love the way you've transformed tragedy into triumph. I love the future I see when I look into your eyes." He took her gloved hand in his. "Pearlie Vance, would you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of happiness spilled down Pearlie's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, with all my heart." Yancy slipped the ring onto her finger over her glove, promising a proper fitting later, and then gathered her into his arms for a tender kiss there first, but one that held the promise of a lifetime of love to follow. As they rode back to town, Pearlie nestled against Yancy's side, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect happiness. From the auction block to a proposal under the stars, a transformation as dramatic as the Dakota seasons, but infinitely more beautiful. Spring brought renewal to the prairie and wedding preparations to Fargo. The town buzzed with excitement over the upcoming nuptials of the successful hotelier and the talented chef, whose love story had captured local imaginations. The wedding was to be held in early May, when the prairie wildflowers would be in bloom. Pearlie, with Sarah's help, sewed her wedding dress ivory silk with lace trim that Mrs. Fletcher surprisingly contributed from her own treasured collection. "Something borrowed," the older woman said gruffly, clearly moved despite herself. "It was on my own wedding dress long ago." Yancy, meanwhile, built a new house on the edge of town large enough for a family but not ostentatious, with a spacious kitchen designed specifically with Pearlie's needs in mind. "So you can experiment at home," he explained when he showed her the plans. "Though I expect Amelia's will always be your true creative space." The morning of their wedding dawned clear and mild, the prairie stretching endlessly under a perfect blue sky. In the church, decorated with wild flowers and ribbons, Yancy waited at the altar, his expression a mixture of nervousness and joy. When Pearlie appeared at the back of the church, a hush fell over the gathered townspeople. She wore her ivory gown, her brown hair arranged in soft curls adorned with tiny white flowers. But it was her radiant smile that truly captivated everyone, especially the man waiting to make her his wife. With no family to give her away, Pearlie had asked Jameson to do the honor. The gruff cook, now semi-retired and acting as consultant at Amelia's, had been moved to tears by the request. Now he walked proudly beside her, his weathered face solemn but eyes bright with emotion. As they reached the altar and Jameson placed Pearlie's hand in Yancy's, the old cook whispered fiercely, "You take care of her, young man. She's the finest person in this territory." "I know," Yancy replied softly. "I intend to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that." The service was simple but heartfelt. When they exchanged vows, Pearlie's voice rang out clear and true, reflecting the certainty she felt in her heart. Yancy's deeper tones complemented hers, his promises spoken with unwavering conviction. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the pastor declared. "You may kiss your bride." Yancy lifted Pearlie's veil and gazed into her eyes for a moment before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that sealed their bond. The church erupted in applause as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as husband and wife. The celebration afterward at Amelia's was joyous and lively. The restaurant had been closed to the public for the day, transformed into a reception hall with tables laden with the finest food the kitchen had ever produced, some prepared by Pearlie herself in the days leading up, and some by her carefully trained staff. As the evening progressed, Yancy pulled his bride aside for a quiet moment together. "Happy, Mrs. Young?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "Completely," she replied, raising a hand to touch his cheek, "though I still can't quite believe it's real. From that auction block to here, sometimes it feels like a dream." "It's very real," he assured her, covering her hand with his own, "and it's only the beginning." Later, as they prepared to leave for their wedding trip to St. Paul, Mrs. Fletcher approached them. The usually stern woman embraced Pearlie warmly. "You've done well for yourself, my dear, not because you married a successful man, but because you've built a life worthy of pride on your own merits." "Thank you," Pearlie said, genuinely touched, "for everything you did for me when I needed it most." "I merely provided opportunity," Mrs. Fletcher replied with a small smile. "You seized it with both hands. That's a rare quality." As they rode away in Yancy's carriage, rose petals and well wishes showering down upon them, Pearlie looked back at the town of Fargo at Amelia's with her mother's portrait visible through the window, at the Occidental Hotel where she had found her footing, at the friends waving from the boardwalk. "What are you thinking?" Yancy asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "That life takes us on unexpected journeys," she replied, turning to smile at her husband. "If you had told me a year ago that the darkest day of my life would lead to all this happiness, I would never have believed it." "Sometimes the darkest moments are just before dawn," Yancy said, drawing her close against the evening chill. "And what a beautiful dawn it's turned out to be." 5 years later, Amelia's had expanded to 3 locations, the original in Fargo, one in Bismarck, and the newest in the rapidly growing city of Minneapolis. Yancy's hotel business had grown as well, with the Occidental chain now recognized throughout the upper Midwest for quality and comfort. But their greatest joy was their family. 3-year-old Henry, named for Yancy's adoptive father, had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined spirit. 1-year-old Amelia, named for the grandmother she would never meet but whose legacy lived on, already showed an interest in the kitchen, banging happily on pots and pans whenever Pearlie was cooking. On the anniversary of the auction that had brought them together, Yancy and Pearlie made it a tradition to close Amelia's original location for a private family dinner. This year was special, as they had news to share with their close circle of friends. Sarah, now married to the town's schoolteacher, arrived with her own toddler in tow. Mrs. Fletcher, her hair now completely white but her bearing still regal, brought a small gift for each of the children. Jameson, fully retired but still a frequent visitor to the kitchen, came bearing a new recipe he thought Pearlie might want to try. As they gathered around the table, Yancy stood to offer a toast. "To absent friends and family," he began, raising his glass toward Amelia's portrait on the wall. "To those who shaped us and those we hold dear, and to new beginnings, which seem to be a constant in our lives." He smiled at Pearlie, who nodded encouragingly. "Speaking of new beginnings, Pearlie and I are pleased to announce that our family will be growing again this winter. We're expecting another child in December." Cheers and congratulations filled the room, with Sarah rushing to embrace Pearlie and Jameson pounding Yancy on the back. Mrs. Fletcher dabbed discreetly at her eyes, her usual composure briefly overcome. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were asleep, Pearlie and Yancy stood on the porch of their home, looking out at the star-filled Dakota sky. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Pearlie asked, leaning against her husband's solid strength. "If you hadn't come to that auction?" "Sometimes," Yancy admitted, his arm tightening around her waist. "But then I remember something my Henry used to say. He believed that certain souls are meant to find each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way." "Like fate," Pearlie mused. "Like love," Yancy corrected gently. "Stronger than fate, more enduring than time. I believe we would have found each other somehow, Pearlie." "That auction just gave us our beginning a little sooner." Pearlie smiled, placing her hand over his where it rested on her still flat stomach. "A beginning that led to all this." "And much more to come," Yancy promised, bending to kiss her under the vast Dakota sky, their love as boundless as the prairie that had brought them together. In the years that followed, the story of the cowboy who raised his hand at an auction and changed a young woman's life became something of a legend in Fargo. Embellished in the retelling, it nevertheless contained the essential truth that a single act of courage and compassion had rippled outward, transforming not just two lives but an entire community. Pearlie and Yancy Young raised 4 children who grew up understanding the value of kindness and the power of second chances. The restaurants bearing Amelia Vance's name became institutions, preserving a culinary tradition that might otherwise have been lost. And the love that had begun in the unlikeliest of circumstances continued to flourish, growing deeper and richer with each passing year. When asked the secret to their enduring happiness, Pearlie would simply smile and say, "Sometimes the happiest endings come from the most difficult beginnings. You just have to be brave enough to turn the page." And Yancy, the quiet cowboy who had become a successful businessman without losing his fundamental decency, would add with characteristic simplicity, "When you see something precious being auctioned off, you raise your hand and pay whatever it costs. Some things are beyond price." In this wisdom, shared freely with all who knew them, lay the true legacy of their extraordinary journey, a testament to the transformative power of love, courage, and second chances on the wild Dakota frontier.